NBA world woke up to trade news today. The Raptors and the Knicks came to an agreement for a trade centered around OG Anunoby, who has been on the trading block since seemingly Kawhi was in Toronto, in exchange for Emmanuel Quickley and Canada's own RJ Barrett. Not counting James Harden's annual pouting routine, it was the first major trade of this season, and it's really the first of the NBA's true trade season. There are a number of restrictions that keep the floodgates closed over the first few months of the NBA season. There are restrictions that keep teams from trading away newly signed players or recently traded players, and those types of restrictions typically expire in mid-December. So between mid-December and early February's trade deadline is when the NBA trade season is truly alive. Now, Adrian Wojnarowski has already tempered expectations for this season's trade deadline, stating that there are simply a lot of buyers and not a lot of sellers, and it could make for a fairly tepid NBA trade season and deadline. But that's not going to stop the content makers of the NBA world, such as myself, from discussing potential trades, and that is exactly what I'm here to discuss. Yesterday, a tweet made the rounds on Timberwolves Twitter. It was a tweet from NBA Central, citing their sources Sam Amico, sorry, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. I don't really know how to read. I've just been guessing this whole time. Stating that the Washington Wizards are open to trading Tyus Jones, and it makes perfect sense. Tyus is a highly capable veteran point guard on an expiring contract, and the Wizards are, simply put, one of the worst teams in the league. Now, naturally, without even a moment's hesitation, Wolves fans from all over Twitter and Reddit were calling for the front office to bring Tyus Jones back to Minnesota. Most critically, Tyus Jones' number one fan and good friend of the channel, my buddy Frank, has been calling for the Wolves to go out and get Tyus back for years. Now, for those that aren't aware, Tyus is a true Minnesota boy, born and raised. He was born in Burnsville, went to high school in Apple Valley, and after a single season with Duke, Tyus entered the draft and in true storybook fashion ended up with his hometown Minnesota Timberwolves, and he played his entire rookie contract here. And over those 4 years with us, he developed as a very reliable, team-oriented pass-first point guard. Unfortunately, at the expiration of his contract, the Wolves were in a bit of a bind contract-wise. Towns and Wiggins were both on max deals, and we had some well-compensated role players at the time, including Jeff Teague and Gorgie Jang. Times were rough. We should just really be thankful for what's happening right now. And to the dismay of many Timberwolves fans, the Wolves elected not to match the Memphis Grizzlies. The Wolves elected not to match the Memphis Grizzlies offer sheet to Tyus, and the Wolves let him walk out the door as a restricted free agent. Really heartbreaking stuff. Tyus has since been moved to the Washington Wizards as part of the Porzingis-Marcus Smart three-way trade with the Celtics, the Grizzlies, and the Wizards. But that's where Tyus is right now on an expiring contract for a pretty terrible Wizards team. So now that we're all caught up on Tyus, let's talk about the logistics of a potential trade for him and if it really makes sense for the Wolves beyond our heart's desires to get our boy back. Now, what I'm aiming to do in this video is to separate the brain and the heart for Wolves fans. The heart of any Wolves fan is obviously to get Tyus back, but we gotta look at the brain. The Wolves are contenders for the first time in a long time, and we do not want to disturb that balance. So, let's start with a need. Do we need Tyus? Is adding him worth disrupting our roster as is? Well, here's what Tyus brings to a team. Tyus is, simply put, a steady hand. He's a pass-first point guard who does not make a lot of mistakes. He's genuinely very similar to Mike Conley, with a little less scoring touch, but even more mistake-free. Now, I know that's crazy to say, because if you're watching these Wolves games, you know Mike Conley doesn't make a lot of mistakes. And I didn't say that as any slight to Bite, alright? He is one of the league's best in this category, but the specific stat I'm referencing is assist-to-turnover ratio. Now, I'm about to unveil to you a Jordan-esque level of statistical domination. What Dennis Rodman was to rebounding in the 90s, Tyus Jones is to assist-to-turnover ratio within the last decade. In 2017 and 2018, Tyus was the second and third leader, respectively, in assist-to-turnover ratio. Then from 2019 to 2022, Tyus was number one in the league every single season, a streak that was broken last year when he finished second, but you'll be happy to know that this year he's back on pace as first in the league. So I'm serious. He is a pass-first point guard who doesn't make mistakes. He gets a lot of assists, and he gets very few turnovers. Now, Tyus isn't perfect, although my heart believes he is. He is a very small point guard at just 6'1". Now, he's not a defensive liability. He's a very intelligent defender who does a great job of getting in passing lanes. He's just physically at a disadvantage because of his stature. Well, you know who that sounds like? Mike Conley. I'm serious, the parallels are pretty pronounced. Mike Conley is also 6'1". He's an undersized point guard who is a solid high IQ defender. Now, I'm not talking about Mike because I'm saying we're going to trade him away for Tyus. God, no. Bite must be protected at all costs. I'm talking about Mike Conley because he's proof of a player with this profile succeeding on the Wolves. I can say with confidence that Tyus would fit well into this squad because Mike Conley does. Now, Wolves fans, we have a harsh reality coming down the pipes at us. Mike Conley is on an expiring contract and he's 37 years old. There is no force on earth that could make me advocate for moving Mike Conley this season. He is here to help guide us through, at a minimum, this playoff run. We must look to the future, however. What happens after this season? Ideally, Mike Conley returns to play for the Wolves on a smaller contract after he enters unrestricted free agency. Mike Conley's $24 million contract is expiring, and while I love Mike Conley, he's simply not going to get that kind of value on his next contract at his age. So, the real question becomes, how much cap space are the Wolves going to end up with, and what are they willing to pay him? And how does that line up with the price that Mike Conley values his services at? Now, that's not what this video is about, but it must be considered. The Wolves have a 36-year-old point guard on an expiring contract, so what does the future look like for the Wolves at point guard? Now, well, personally, I hope Mike Conley finds the fountain of youth and re-signs with us on a veteran minimum contract for no reason at all. I don't think it's very realistic. Promotions from within are not ideal. Shake Milton has struggled mightily since arriving in Minnesota, and while I hope Shake is able to return to form and contribute to the Wolves, he's just not a viable starting option, and he's actually fallen out of the rotation. Jordan McLaughlin, he's been with the Wolves for a while now, and while I am a fan and I hope to see him return to the rotation following the bouts he's had with injuries, he's just not a starting caliber point guard. Now, I just attended a Wolves Mavericks game this week, and both Milton and McLaughlin were healthy scratches. Kyle Anderson was operating as our backup point guard. If the Wolves don't retain Conley, they're going to have to look outside of the organization for the point guard of the future. And for this season, are we cool with running with Kyle Anderson as our backup point guard? I hope I painted a good enough picture here. The Wolves are running Kyle Anderson as our backup point guard, and next season, there's a good chance we're going to need a replacement for Mike Conley. And a 27-year-old Mike Conley-like point guard is available on the trade market. Tyus Jones does make a hell of a lot of sense, but what would we have to do to get him? Let's quickly cover finances. Tyus Jones is on a $14 million expiring contract. So the Wolves would have to give up about that much in salary to get him, and then hopefully the Wolves would be able to re-sign him to a similarly sized contract in the offseason. So what would the Wolves have to send out in a potential trade? Now, obviously, Ant, Cat, Rudy, and Jaden are all absolutely untouchable, and their contracts are way too large anyway, and like I said before, there's no force on earth that would make me trade Mike Conley this season. Naz Reid is on a very similarly sized contract, but come on now, let's get serious. Wolves fans would rather trade their own firstborn child than see Naz Reid in a Wizards jersey. So, that leaves one very conspicuous, conveniently sized contract. Kyle Anderson. Anderson's on a $9 million deal, which also expires this year. Could we afford to trade Kyle Anderson away? Now, that's really the question, and it's a better question for people closer to the organization. Statistically, yeah, we could afford to trade him, but the question is if we can afford to trade him culturally. Kyle Anderson has clearly become a leader amongst the Wolves, and his defensive efforts and leadership ability have been very important to our success. If those closer to the situation say he's simply too valuable as a leader and he's too valuable in the locker room, then shoot this trade dead right here. However, if that's not deemed to be the case and his looming free agency is enough for the Wolves to shuffle the cards and send Anderson out, then this trade really gains some traction. Kyle has served as something of a backup point guard for us, and Tyus would obviously be an extreme upgrade as far as a point guard goes, but that's not really what Kyle does for us. He's a defensive wing who's playing out a position to fill a need. Without Kyle, our bench rotation on the wings, it would be significantly weaker. It would be down to Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Troy Brown Jr. And with any other depth, it would come down to G League guys. And no disrespect to them, but I guess it just makes me a little nervous to lose that proven veteran depth. Now, there are a number of ways to configure this trade, but it would need to be Kyle Anderson and another medium-sized, $5 million-ish sized contract. So, basically, it would be Kyle Anderson and Shake Milton, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, or Troy Brown Jr. And I'll say outright, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is not an option. He's simply too valuable, and as far as his contract goes, it's a very affordable $4.3 million next year. So losing a player of that value at that value is just not reasonable to me. It would be Kyle Anderson and Shake Milton, or Kyle Anderson and Troy Brown Jr. Obviously, preferably Shake Milton. Plus draft compensation. That's really the get here for the Wizards. Now, the Wolves don't have hardly anything to give up as far as first rounders go. Infamously, we gave up every single one of our first round picks until the end of time for Rudy Gobert. So, other teams willing to submit a first round pick will simply offer a stronger package to the Wizards. But the Wolves do have an assembly of second round picks, which in exchange for a low end starting point guard might just be enough. None of these upcoming second round picks are our own, which actually helps because for the first time basically ever, our draft picks are going to be late in the round. Doesn't that feel nice? Now, would the Wizards bite on Kyle Anderson, Shake Milton, and a couple second-round picks? They could redirect Kyle Anderson for even more draft picks, which I'm assuming is what they're looking for. It's not a tremendous package, but to be honest, Tyus Jones on an expiring contract isn't going to reel in a bunch of first-round picks. Maybe another contender would throw in a very late first-round pick for Tyus, but to be honest, most of the contenders have already traded away those first-round picks. So, most likely, the catching price for Tyus is going to be either a young player or a couple second-round draft picks. Maybe the Wolves will just wait for Tyus' contract to expire, and then we'll try to sign him out of unrestricted free agency next season. It is a realistic option. But I think this trade makes us better right now, and that's what's most important. So, in summary, if the Wolves don't have faith that they'll be able to retain Mike Conley past this season, and if they believe trading Kyle Anderson wouldn't be too destabilizing for the team, and if they believe that they can make the finances work to offer Tyus a contract in the upcoming seasons, I believe this trade would improve the team immediately and help secure a stronger future. My heart and my brain are in alignment. Bring Tyus home. Stay lit. Thanks for watching.